Lady Catherine Ashford was 22 years old when she discovered that the man she was meant to marry was a monster. Not the dramatic kind that inhabited Gothic novels, no supernatural curse or violent temper. Just the ordinary practical cruelty of a man who saw other people as resources to be exploited rather than souls deserving of dignity. She found the documents in Lord Edmund Blackwood's study on a Tuesday afternoon in late November, while the household was occupied with preparations for their wedding the following month. She had gone looking for writing paper, an innocent errand that would shatter her entire understanding of the man whose name she would soon bear. The ledgers were hidden behind a false panel in the bookshelf, discovered only because Catherine had knocked against it while reaching for the top shelf. The panel swung open, revealing 3 leather-bound volumes that clearly were not meant for casual viewing. Curiosity, her mother had often warned, was unbecoming in a lady. But Catherine had never been particularly good at becoming, so she pulled the first volume free and began to read. What she found made her stomach turn. Tenant contracts for the Blackwood estates in Yorkshire, not the generous terms Edmund had described during their courtship, but agreements that essentially made the farmers indentured servants. Rents raised without notice, crops seized for taxes that appeared nowhere in official records, families evicted in winter for failing to meet impossible quotas, their land immediately resold at profit to investors who knew nothing of the suffering that had cleared it. The second volume was worse. Records of tenant petitions, desperate pleas for mercy, for time to pay, for compassion during harvest failures, each one marked "denied" in Edmund's precise handwriting, followed by notes about seizing property and assets. The third volume contained correspondence with other landowners, advice on maximizing profit through what Edmund called firm management, but which read to Catherine like systematic cruelty. Instructions on breaking tenant organizing efforts.
Suggestions for using debt to control families across generations. Calculations of exactly how much hardship people could endure before they became economically unviable. Catherine sat in Edmund's leather chair, surrounded by evidence of suffering, and felt her world reorganize itself around a terrible new truth. The man she had agreed to marry, the charming gentleman who had courted her with poetry and attention, was deliberately impoverishing hundreds of families for personal gain.
She was still sitting there when Edmund found her an hour later. "Catherine," his voice was carefully neutral, "I didn't expect you in my study. I was looking for writing paper." She kept her gaze on the ledgers spread before her. "I found these instead." Edmund closed the door with quiet finality. "I see. Is it true? All of it?" She finally looked up at him. "The evictions, the contract manipulation, the families you've destroyed?" "Destroyed is a dramatic word." Edmund crossed to the window, his posture relaxed. "I've managed my estates efficiently. The tenants who cannot adapt to modern agricultural practices are replaced by those who can. It's simply economics. It's cruelty. It's survival in a changing world." He turned to face her. "My father nearly bankrupted this family with his softness, his concern for tenant welfare at the expense of profit. I rebuilt what he squandered. The Blackwood fortune is now secure, and our marriage will be extremely comfortable as a result." Catherine stood, her hands shaking. "I cannot marry you knowing this." "Of course you can. You've already agreed. The contracts are signed, the settlements arranged. Your family has accepted significant financial considerations based on this alliance." The words struck like a blow. Her father, who had been so pleased about the match, who had spoken of Edmund with such approval, had already spent money advanced against the marriage. "Then I'll find a way to repay it," Catherine said. "But I will not become your wife while you continue to abuse the people who depend on you." Edmund's expression hardened. "You're being naive. Every estate operates this way. The only difference is that I'm honest about it in my private records. Then change it. Return to fair practices. I'll help you establish reasonable tenant agreements." "No." The single word carried absolute finality. "I've built a system that works," Edmund continued. "I will not dismantle it because my sentimental fiancé discovered records she was not meant to see. You have 2 choices, Catherine. Marry me as planned and enjoy the comfortable life my efficiency provides, or refuse the marriage and watch your family face financial ruin when I demand immediate return of funds they've already spent." Catherine felt the trap close around her. Her father had gambled on this alliance, had made commitments he could not honor without Edmund's money. Refusing the marriage would destroy her family, but accepting it would make her complicit in suffering she could no longer ignore. "There must be another way," she whispered. "There isn't." Edmund's voice softened slightly, taking on the charm that had first won her. "Catherine, you're intelligent enough to understand reality. The world is not kind to idealists. Marry me, live well, let me manage the estates as I see fit. In time, you'll realize I'm right." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw clearly for the first time. The charm was calculation. The attention was strategy. He had courted her not for love, but because the Ashford family connections would be useful, because a wife who came with social advantages was worth the trouble of pretending affection. "I need time to think," she said finally. "You have until tomorrow morning. I'm traveling to the northern estates for final inspections before winter. When I return in 3 days, I'll await your decision." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Choose wisely, Catherine. Your family's future depends on it." After he left, Catherine sat in the study until darkness fell, surrounded by evidence of cruelty, and trapped by obligations she had not chosen. She thought of the Tenant families, of children being evicted into winter cold, of futures being stolen for profit margins. She could not marry Edmund, but she could not destroy her family either. There had to be another way. She simply had to find it before Edmund returned and forced her decision. What Catherine did not know, could not have guessed, was that Edmund had already made his own decision about what to do with a fiancé who knew too much. The carriage ride was Edmund's idea. "Before I depart for the north," he had said that morning, appearing in the breakfast room with his usual charm restored, "let us take one final ride together. There's a cottage on the estate boundary I think you'd like to see. We might use it as a summer retreat after we're married." Catherine should have been suspicious, should have recognized the peculiarity of visiting a summer cottage in late November with snow threatening. But she was exhausted from a sleepless night of weighing impossible choices, and the prospect of escaping the house for a few hours felt like mercy. So she agreed. They rode in Edmund's private carriage, just the two of them, along roads that grew progressively more isolated as they moved away from the main house. Catherine watched the landscape turn white as the first snow began to fall, and tried to find words for the conversation they needed to have. "Edmund, about what I found in your study. Have you made your decision?" he interrupted. "I cannot marry you as things stand, but perhaps we might negotiate new terms for your tenant contracts. I could help draft agreements that are both profitable and humane." "No. But Edmund, Catherine, I gave you a simple choice. Accept reality or face consequences. There is no third option." His voice remained pleasant, conversational. "You must understand that I cannot allow you to undermine years of careful management with sentimental reforms." "I'm not trying to undermine." "Yes, you are. You discovered information you were not meant to have, and now you want to use it to force changes I will not make." He pulled a folded letter from his coat. "This morning, I wrote to your father explaining that our engagement is terminated due to your instability. I mentioned concerning behaviors, suggestions that you've been irrational, possibly even mentally unsound." Catherine's blood ran cold. "That's a lie." "Is it? Who will society believe? Me or the hysterical young woman making wild accusations about respected estate management practices?" He tucked the letter away. "Your father will be devastated, of course, and confused about how to repay the funds he's already spent, funds he no longer has. You're trying to frighten me into compliance." I'm explaining reality." Edmund glanced out the window at the increasingly heavy snow. "But I've decided that frightening you is insufficient. You've proven yourself too stubborn for simple intimidation." The carriage was slowing. Catherine looked out to see they had stopped in the middle of nowhere. A forest road, barely traveled, with snow beginning to accumulate in earnest. "Why are we stopping?" "Because this is where you get out." Catherine laughed, the sound sharp with disbelief. "Don't be absurd. We're miles from anywhere and it's snowing." Edmund opened the carriage door, Cold air rushed in, stealing her breath. "Get out, Catherine." "Edmund, this isn't funny." He grabbed her arm, his grip iron hard, and pulled her toward the door. Catherine struggled, but he was stronger, and within seconds, she was being pushed out into the snow. She stumbled, catching herself on the carriage step. "Edmund, please. You know too much," he said calmly, as though discussing the weather. "I gave you a chance to keep silent and benefit from our arrangement. You refused. So now you've become a problem that needs to disappear. You can't just leave me here." "I can, and I am." He pulled her hand from the step, and she fell backward into the snow. "The storm is worsening. This road is rarely used in winter. By the time anyone finds you, if anyone finds you, you'll be dead from exposure." A tragic accident. A young woman who wandered away from the carriage during a stop and became lost in the storm. Catherine scrambled to her feet, but Edmund was already closing the carriage door. "No one will believe I simply wandered away." "They will, because I'll tell them you've been increasingly erratic lately, that you insisted on walking despite my warnings, that you disappeared into the trees before I could stop you." He leaned out the window, his expression almost regretful. "I'm sorry it had to be this way, Catherine. You could have had a very comfortable life." "Edmund, please." But the carriage was already moving, pulling away with increasing speed, leaving her alone on the snowy road. Catherine stood frozen, not with cold yet, but with shock, watching the carriage disappear around a bend. Then the reality of her situation crashed over her with the same brutal force as the wind that was picking up around her. She was alone, in a snowstorm, miles from any shelter, wearing only a day dress and light cloak. Edmund intended for her to die here. Catherine forced herself to move, to think. The road stretched in both directions, equally unfamiliar. Edmund had taken her too far from the main house for her to walk back, before the storm became deadly. But perhaps there was a cottage nearby, a barn, somewhere she could shelter until the weather cleared. She started walking back the way they had come, because at least that direction eventually led toward civilization. The snow was falling harder now, obscuring her footprints almost as soon as she made them. Her slippers, designed for drawing rooms, not winter roads, were already soaked through. Time became difficult to measure. Catherine walked until her feet went numb, then kept walking because stopping meant dying. She called out periodically, hoping for a farmer or traveler, but the storm swallowed her voice. She didn't know how long she had been walking when she stumbled. Her foot caught on something hidden beneath the snow, a rock, a root, and she went down hard. Pain shot through her ankle as it twisted beneath her. Catherine tried to stand and nearly screamed as weight on the injured ankle proved impossible. She tried again, managed to get upright, and immediately fell as the ankle buckled. This was how it would end then. Not frozen while walking, but frozen here beside the road, unable to continue. She thought of her family, of the disgrace Edmund would bring upon them with his lies about her instability. She thought of the Tenant families whose suffering she had discovered too late to prevent. She thought of everything she would never do, never become, because Edmund Blackwood had decided she was more convenient dead than alive. The cold was creeping in now, insidious and almost gentle. Catherine's shivering had stopped, which she knew was a bad sign. Her thoughts were becoming difficult to organize, slipping away like the snow that melted on her face. She was so tired. Perhaps if she just rested for a moment. Catherine closed her eyes and felt the world fade into white silence. Adrian Thorne, Duke of Northmere, was in his study reviewing quarterly reports when his steward burst through the door without knocking. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion, but—" "What is it, Harrison?" Adrian set down his pen, taking in the man's obvious agitation. "One of the groundskeepers was checking the northern boundary after the storm. He found a woman, Your Grace, in the snow. She's alive, but barely." Adrian was on his feet immediately. "Where is she now?" "We brought her to the servants' quarters. Mrs. Fletcher is attending to her, but the woman needs a physician, and quickly. Send for Dr. Pemberton." "Tell him to come at once, weather be damned." Adrian was already moving toward the door. "Where in the servants' quarters?" "The housekeeper's sitting room, Your Grace. We didn't know where else." But Adrian was already striding down the corridor, his mind racing through implications. A woman found in the snow during yesterday's storm meant she had been out there for hours, possibly all night. The fact that she was alive at all was remarkable. He found her in Mrs. Fletcher's sitting room, wrapped in blankets beside a roaring fire. The housekeeper looked up as he entered. "Your Grace, she's alive but in grave condition. Exposure. Injuries from a fall. She's barely conscious." Adrian knelt beside the makeshift bed. The woman was young, perhaps 22, with dark hair plastered to her head from melted snow. Her skin was dangerously pale, her breathing shallow. But it was her hands that caught his attention. Delicate, marked with ink stains that suggested education and writing. A lady, then. Not a farmer's wife or a servant. "Has she spoken?" Adrian asked. "Only one word, repeatedly. Edmund." Mrs. Fletcher adjusted the blankets. "I don't know if it's a name or a place." "Edmund." Adrian filed the information away. "When Dr. Pemberton arrives, bring him here immediately. In the meantime, keep her warm. Hot bricks. Warm drinks if she can swallow them. Everything we can do." "Of course, Your Grace." Adrian should have left then. Should have returned to his study and allowed his staff to handle the situation. But something made him stay, watching the unconscious woman breathe, wondering what circumstances had left her alone in a snowstorm. Dr. Pemberton arrived within the hour, examined the woman with practiced efficiency, and delivered his verdict with the frankness Adrian appreciated. "She'll live, barring complications. The exposure was severe but not quite fatal. Broken ankle, possibly fractured ribs, signs of having fallen hard. She was extraordinarily lucky." "Lucky that my groundskeeper found her," Adrian said. "Lucky that she's alive at all. Another hour and we'd be discussing funeral arrangements." Pemberton packed his bag. "She'll need careful nursing for at least a week. Rest, warmth, someone to watch for fever. I'll return tomorrow to check on her progress." After the physician departed, Adrian stood at the window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds of Northmere Estate. Somewhere out there was the spot where the woman had fallen, where she had nearly died. Who was she? Why had she been alone in the storm? And why did Adrian have the unsettling feeling that her appearance at Northmere was about to complicate his life in ways he could not yet predict? Catherine woke to warmth and pain in equal measure. The warmth came from blankets heaped upon her, from a fire crackling nearby, from the absence of wind and snow. The pain came from her ankle, now properly splinted, and from ribs that protested every breath. But she was alive. Memory returned in fragments. Edmund's face as he closed the carriage door. The endless walking. The fall. The cold creeping in like a tide she couldn't escape. Someone had found her. Saved her. "You're awake." A woman's voice, practical and kind. "Don't try to sit up yet. You've been through quite an ordeal." Catherine turned her head carefully. A middle-aged woman in housekeeper's black sat beside the bed, concern evident on her face. "Where—" Catherine's voice came out as a rasp. "Northmere Estate. You were found on the boundary road during yesterday's storm. You've been unconscious for nearly 18 hours. The housekeeper offered a cup of water. "Drink slowly." The water was cool and perfect. Catherine drank, then managed, "Who found me?" "One of the Duke's groundskeepers. You're very fortunate, miss. That road is rarely traveled in winter." The Duke. Catherine's mind struggled to process information through the fog of exhaustion. "Which Duke?" "The Duke of Northmere. His Grace has given orders that you're to be cared for until you've recovered." The housekeeper smiled slightly. "I'm Mrs. Fletcher, the housekeeper here. What's your name, dear?" Catherine hesitated. Edmund would report her missing. Would claim she had wandered away, become lost, presumably perished. If he learned she had survived and was at Northmere, he would come for her. Would find some way to finish what he'd started. "Catherine," she said finally, because lying about her given name felt like too much effort. "Just Catherine." "Well, just Catherine. You're safe here. His Grace wants to speak with you when you're strong enough, but that can wait until tomorrow. For now, you need rest." Over the next 2 days, Catherine recovered enough to sit up, to eat solid food, to piece together what had happened. The groundskeeper who found her, a man named Thomas who came by to check on her recovery, explained that he had only been checking that section of boundary because a fence needed repair before spring. "Pure luck I found you, miss," he said, his weathered face earnest. "Another day and the snow would have buried you completely." Not luck, Catherine thought. Providence, perhaps. Or simply the mathematics of proximity. She had fallen close enough to Northmere's boundaries that a diligent groundskeeper's routine had intersected with her dying. On the third day, Mrs. Fletcher announced that His Grace wished to speak with her if she felt well enough. Catherine did not feel well enough, but she needed to understand where she was, who had saved her, and whether she was truly safe here. The Duke of Northmere arrived at noon, entering the housekeeper's sitting room with the confident stride of a man accustomed to owning everything he surveyed. He was perhaps 35, tall and dark-haired, with the kind of strong features that suggested character rather than mere handsomeness. His eyes were a striking grey-green, intelligent, and assessing. "Miss Catherine," he said, inclining his head, "I'm Adrian Thorne, Duke of Northmere. I'm pleased to see you recovering. Your Grace." Catherine attempted a curtsy from her seated position, wincing as her ribs protested. "I understand I owe you my life. Thank you for your kindness in taking me in. My groundskeeper found you. The kindness is simply providing the care any Christian would offer to someone in need." He settled into the chair opposite her, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp. "I wonder if you might tell me how you came to be alone in a snowstorm on that particular road." The question Catherine had been dreading. She could lie, invent some story about a carriage accident, about being separated from traveling companions, but something in the Duke's expression suggested he would know a lie when he heard it. "I was deliberately left there," she said quietly, "by someone who wished me dead." Adrian's expression didn't change, but Catherine saw his hands tighten on the chair arms. "That is a serious accusation. It is a serious truth." "Who?" Catherine met his gaze steadily. "Before I answer that, Your Grace, I must ask, do you know Lord Edmund Blackwood?" The Duke's eyes narrowed. "Blackwood of Ashwood? Yes, I know him. We've had disagreements." "What kind of disagreements?" "Why does it matter?" "Because if you are his friend, I am not safe here. And if you are his enemy, you might choose to use me against him, which is only marginally safer." Adrian studied her for a long moment. "You're remarkably clear-headed for someone who was nearly frozen to death 3 days ago. Fear clarifies thought, Your Grace." "So it does." He stood, walking to the window. "Blackwood and I have been in opposition for years. He supports policies in Parliament that I oppose. His estate management practices are, in my view, exploitative and cruel. He has blocked reforms I've proposed, undermined alliances I've built, and generally made himself my most persistent political adversary." He turned back to face her. "We are not friends. And if I told you I could help destroy him, would you use that to your advantage?" "Probably." His honesty was startling. "But I would not discard you once you'd served your purpose. Unlike Blackwood, I do not treat people as disposable resources." Catherine searched his face for signs of deception and found only steady certainty. "He is my former fiancé. I discovered evidence of his systematic abuse of tenant families, contract manipulation, illegal evictions, essentially debt slavery disguised as modern estate management. When I confronted him, he left me in the snow to die rather than risk my exposure to his practices." Adrian's expression had gone very still. "Do you have proof of these practices?" "I saw the ledgers. 3 volumes documenting years of exploitation. But I don't have them. They're in his study at Ashwood. And your testimony alone would be dismissed as the ravings of a spurned fiancé, yes. I understand how this works, Your Grace. An unmarried woman's word against a peer of the realm who will claim I'm unbalanced and vindictive. Then we have a problem," Adrian said slowly. "Because everything you're telling me aligns with suspicions I've held for years, but could never prove. Blackwood is too careful, too skilled at maintaining his public reputation while conducting his private cruelties. So I am useless to you." "I didn't say that." Adrian returned to his chair, leaning forward with sudden intensity. "What if we made you less easy to dismiss? What if your word carried the weight of rank and position that matched his? Catherine's heart began to beat faster. "What are you suggesting?" "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them, absurd and impossible and somehow inevitable. "You're not serious," Catherine managed. "I'm always serious about strategy. You need protection that Blackwood cannot penetrate. I need credible testimony against his estate practices. Testimony that cannot be dismissed as coming from a nobody with an axe to grind. As my wife, as the Duchess of Northmere, your word carries weight. Your accusations demand investigation rather than dismissal." "That's insane. That's practical." Adrian's expression was calm, certain. "Blackwood left you to die because he saw you as powerless. Become my Duchess, and you're beyond his reach. Help me build a case against him, and we destroy his reputation together." Catherine pressed her hand to her forehead, trying to organize thoughts that felt like they were scattering in too many directions. "You don't know me. You don't love me. This is a marriage of mutual benefit, yes. I'm not offering romance, Catherine. I'm offering protection, position, and the means to achieve justice for yourself and the families Blackwood has harmed. In return, you provide testimony and whatever details you remember about what you saw in those ledgers. And if I refuse, then I'll help you reach family or friends who can shelter you, and I'll wish you well. But Blackwood believes you're dead. The moment you surface anywhere, that changes. He'll come for you, and next time he'll make certain the job is finished." The words were brutal, but Catherine could not argue with their logic. Edmund had tried to murder her. He would not allow her survival to threaten his secrets. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I want your word that you'll pursue justice, not simply revenge. That the families he's harmed will be helped, not just used as ammunition in your political war." Adrian's eyes gleamed with something that might have been respect. "You negotiate terms while sitting injured in my housekeeper's quarters. Those are bold requirements. Those are my requirements." "Then I agree. Justice, not merely revenge. Aid for the families, not just exposure of wrongdoing." He stood, extending his hand. "Do we have an agreement?" Catherine looked at his hand, strong, scarred, belonging to a man she did not know but who was offering her the only path to survival and justice that she could see. She had been left in the cold to die by a man who had pretended to love her. Now she was being offered protection by a man who promised nothing except honest strategy. Somehow that felt like the safer bet. Catherine took his hand. "We have an agreement." His grip was firm, warm. "Then rest, Catherine. When you're recovered enough to travel, I'll take you to Northmere proper. We have a wedding to plan and a case to build. How long do I have to recover?" "Dr. Pemberton says at least a week before you should attempt to travel. Use that time to remember everything you can about those ledgers. Every detail matters." After the Duke left, Mrs. Fletcher bustled back in with tea and a concerned expression. "I couldn't help overhearing, miss. You're to marry his grace." "Apparently. He's a good man, if that eases your mind. Fair, honorable, sometimes too focused on duty, but never cruel." Mrs. Fletcher poured tea with practiced efficiency. "You could do far worse for a husband." "He's not really going to be a husband," Catherine said. "This is strategy, not marriage." Mrs. Fletcher's smile was knowing. "His Grace may see it that way now. But I've worked here 15 years, miss, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you just now. He was assessing me as a potential asset. He was looking at you like you were a person worth saving, not just for what you could offer him, but because saving you mattered." Mrs. Fletcher set down the teapot. "That's not nothing, miss." Catherine sipped her tea and tried not to think about the way Adrian's hand had felt in hers. Steady, certain, safe. She had made a bargain with a stranger to destroy the man who had tried to kill her. The smartest course was to keep it purely transactional. But some traitorous part of her heart was already wondering what it would feel like if the Duke of Northmere ever looked at her as something more than strategy. The wedding took place on a grey December morning in Northmere's private chapel, with only Mrs. Fletcher and Harrison, the steward, as witnesses. Catherine wore a simple gown of deep blue wool, the finest thing she had ever owned, provided by Adrian's seamstress who had worked miracles in 4 days. Her ankle was healing, but still required careful walking. Adrian noticed her slight limp as she approached the altar and offered his arm without comment, his support steady and unobtrusive. The ceremony was brief. Traditional words spoken without emotion, rings exchanged with the efficiency of a business transaction. When the vicar pronounced them married, Adrian inclined his head in acknowledgement, rather than offering a kiss. "The Duchess of Northmere," the vicar said, and Catherine felt the weight of the title settle over her like armor. They signed the registry in silence. Mrs. Fletcher smiled encouragement. And just like that, Catherine Ashford ceased to exist, replaced by Adrian Thorne, a duchess with protection and purpose. "It's done," Adrian said as they left the chapel. "You're safe now, legally, socially, in every way that matters. Blackwood cannot touch you." "Thank you," Catherine said, and meant it. "Don't thank me yet. We have considerable work ahead." He guided her toward Northmere's main house. She had been housed in the servants' wing during recovery, but now she would move to the Duchess's apartments, starting with your education in how to be a duchess. Over the following week, Catherine discovered that becoming a duchess required skills she had never imagined needing. Mrs. Fletcher proved an unexpectedly patient instructor, teaching her which keys opened which doors, which servants managed which duties, and how to navigate the peculiar hierarchy of a great house. "You're the mistress here now," Mrs. Fletcher explained during a tour of the still room. "Every decision about the household ultimately comes to you. His Grace manages the estates and politics. You manage Northmere itself. That seems like a great deal of responsibility." "It is. But you're already handling it better than most would." Mrs. Fletcher handed her a ledger. "These are the household accounts. Review them, ask questions, make changes where you see fit." Catherine spent that evening poring over the accounts, noting the careful stewardship evident in every line. Northmere was run efficiently, but not cruelly. Servants were paid fair wages, food was good quality, repairs were made promptly. Everything she had expected Edmund's estates to be and weren't. Adrian joined her in the library around 9, carrying his own ledgers. "How are the household accounts?" "Remarkably well managed. Mrs. Fletcher is extremely competent." "She is. My mother trained her before she died." He settled into the chair across from her. "Are you ready to begin working on the Blackwood case?" Catherine set aside the household ledger. "Yes." "Then tell me everything you remember from those documents. Start with the first volume." For the next 3 hours, Catherine reconstructed what she had seen. Tenant names, contract terms, eviction records. Adrian took notes with meticulous care, occasionally asking clarifying questions, cross-referencing with his own knowledge of Yorkshire properties. "This tenant, Thomas Hartley, I know him," Adrian said at one point. "He approached me 2 years ago seeking help, saying Blackwood had seized his farm on false pretenses. I had no proof to support his claim against Blackwood's version of events. The ledger showed he was evicted for missing rent after a crop failure, but the notation said the crop failure was because Blackwood had diverted the irrigation water to a different property the week before harvest." Adrian's expression darkened. "Deliberate sabotage then, creating failure to justify seizure. And it happened repeatedly. Different families, same pattern. They worked until past midnight, building a picture of systematic exploitation that was both broader and more deliberate than even Adrian had suspected. When Catherine's voice finally grew hoarse, Adrian called a halt. "That's enough for tonight. You need rest. There's more to document, and we have time to document it. This is not a sprint, Catherine. Building an unassailable case requires patience." He stood, gathering his notes. "You did well tonight. The details you remember are more valuable than you know. Will they be enough?" "Not yet, but they're a foundation." He paused at the door. "Sleep well, Duchess. Tomorrow we continue." The title, Duchess, spoken without mockery or distance, as though he genuinely saw her as such, not merely the woman he had married for strategic purposes. Catherine lay awake that night in the enormous ducal bed, listening to the winter wind rattle the windows, and tried to understand the strange situation she found herself in. Married to a man she barely knew, living in luxury while plotting the destruction of the man who had tried to kill her. Safe, but uncertain what that safety would ultimately cost. The next morning, Adrian announced they would begin receiving visitors. Selected carefully, he explained over breakfast. People who matter, who have influence, who can help spread the word that the Duke of Northmere has married. We need to establish your presence and credibility before we move against Blackwood. He thinks I'm dead. When he learns otherwise, by the time he learns otherwise, you'll be established as my Duchess and beyond his reach to harm. That's the point of these visits. The first visitor was Lord Whitmore, an elderly peer with considerable parliamentary influence. He arrived at noon, was introduced to Catherine with all proper ceremony, and spent an hour discussing estate management practices with Adrian while Catherine served tea and listened. She noticed how Adrian guided the conversation toward tenant rights, how he asked Lord Whitmore's opinions on reform proposals, how he let the older man talk himself into positions that aligned with Adrian's own views without ever seeming to push. After Lord Whitmore departed, Catherine said, "You're quite skilled at that." "At what?" "Making people think your ideas are their own." Adrian smiled faintly. "It's a necessary skill in politics. Direct confrontation rarely changes minds. But careful conversation, planted seeds, the appearance of discovering truth together, that moves people. Is that what you're doing with me? Planting seeds, guiding me toward conclusions you've already reached?" "No." His expression turned serious. "With you, I'm being as honest as I know how to be. You deserve that, given what you've risked by helping me." The honesty surprised her. Catherine had expected calculation, careful management, the same strategic approach he used with Lord Whitmore. Instead, she was getting something that felt almost like respect. More visitors came over the following days. Lady Pemberton, influential in society, and curious about the mysterious new Duchess. Sir Thomas Warren, who managed several Yorkshire estates and had opinions about tenant treatment. Lord and Lady Ashford, longtime allies of Adrian's, who welcomed Catherine with genuine warmth. To each, Adrian introduced her as his wife, his Duchess, the woman he had chosen. To each, Catherine played the role with increasing confidence, learning to navigate conversations about estate management, politics, and the intricate social dynamics that governed their world. "You're a natural at this," Mrs. Fletcher observed one evening, helping Catherine dress for dinner with yet another round of visitors. "Most women take months to grow comfortable with the role. You've managed it in 2 weeks." "I'm motivated," Catherine said. "Every person who accepts me as the Duchess of Northmere is another piece of protection against Edmund. Is that the only motivation?" Catherine met the housekeeper's knowing gaze in the mirror. "What else would there be? Perhaps the fact that His Grace looks at you differently these days. Less like a strategic asset and more like someone he's beginning to genuinely care for." "That's ridiculous. This marriage is a practical arrangement." "It started that way," Mrs. Fletcher agreed. "But I've watched you both over dinners, working together in the library, navigating these social visits as a united front. Something's changing, whether you're ready to acknowledge it or not." Catherine wanted to dismiss the observation, but she couldn't quite manage it, because she had noticed the same thing. The way Adrian sometimes smiled at her comments. The way he sought her opinion on matters that had nothing to do with the Blackwood case. The way his hand had lingered on hers the previous evening when passing her a book. Small things. Probably meaningless. Certainly not love, which neither of them had promised or expected. But something was shifting between them, and Catherine wasn't sure whether that made her hopeful or terrified. 6 weeks after the wedding, Adrian announced they had been invited to the Winter Assembly in York, the most significant social event of the season, attended by every important family in the Northern Territories. "The Blackwoods will be there," he said, watching Catherine's face carefully. "Edmund and his parents. This will be your first public encounter with him since he left you in the snow." Catherine's hands tightened on the book she'd been reading. "And you think this is wise?" "I think it's necessary. We've established you as the Duchess of Northmere. Now we demonstrate that establishment publicly. We show Edmund that you survived, that you're beyond his reach, and that his attempt to silence you has failed spectacularly. He'll try to discredit me. Almost certainly. Which is why we'll be prepared. Adrian crossed to his desk, pulling out a folder of documents. I've been gathering evidence beyond your testimony. Bank records showing irregular transfers. Testimony from former Blackwood tenants about contract manipulation. Patterns of suspicious evictions that align with what you saw in those ledgers. Is it enough? Not yet, but it's building. And your presence at the assembly, as my wife, credible and composed, will make it harder for him to dismiss future accusations as the ravings of a vengeful nobody. Catherine set down her book. When is this assembly? 5 days, which gives us time to prepare you. He smiled slightly, though I suspect you'll handle Edmund better than he'll handle seeing you alive. The days before the assembly passed in a blur of preparation. A new gown was commissioned, midnight blue silk with silver embroidery that made Catherine look every inch a duchess. Adrian drilled her on names and titles, on which families mattered and why, on how to navigate the complex social dynamics of such events. Stay visible, he instructed. Engage with guests. Let them see you as confident, graceful, completely unshakable. Every conversation is an opportunity to plant doubt about Blackwood's character. And when I see him, you stay beside me. You remain composed. You let him see that his attempt to destroy you only made you stronger. Adrian's gaze was steady. Can you do that? Catherine thought of the cold, of the certainty that she would die alone. Then she thought of everything she had become since. A duchess, an advocate for the families Edmund had harmed, a woman with power and purpose. Yes, she said, I can do that. The winter assembly was held in York's assembly rooms, a grand space glittering with candles and crowded with the finest families in Yorkshire. Catherine entered on Adrian's arm, her spine straight and her expression serene, and felt 100 eyes turn to assess her. The whispers started immediately, though most were too well bred to stare overtly. Adrian had been a widower for 7 years. His sudden remarriage to a woman no one had heard of naturally provoked curiosity. The Duke and Duchess of Northmere, the majordomo announced, and Catherine felt the weight of the titles like armor. They circulated slowly through the crowd. Adrian introduced her with quiet pride to dozens of people, lords and ladies, politicians and landowners, everyone who mattered in northern society. Catherine smiled, made appropriate conversation, and watched for the moment when Edmund would realize she was here. It happened an hour into the evening. Catherine was speaking with Lady Pemberton about a recent charity initiative when she saw him across the room. Edmund, dressed in formal black, holding a glass of wine and laughing at something his companion said. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome, charming, the sort of man who drew eyes and trust in equal measure. Then he turned, his gaze sweeping the room, and his eyes found hers. The color drained from his face. The wine glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble floor. Conversation around him stopped as people turned to see what had caused the disruption. Lord Blackwood, someone said, are you quite all right? But Edmund was staring at Catherine like he was seeing a ghost, which, she supposed, he was. Adrian appeared at her elbow, his presence immediately protective. Shall we greet Lord Blackwood? It seems he's noticed you. Yes, Catherine said quietly. Let's. They crossed the room together. Edmund had recovered enough composure to bend down and attempt to gather the broken glass, but his hands were shaking visibly. His mother, Lady Blackwood, had noticed the commotion and was making her way over with obvious concern. Lord Blackwood, Adrian said pleasantly. What a pleasure to see you. Have you met my wife? Catherine, Duchess of Northmere. Edmund straightened slowly, his face a mask of barely controlled shock. Your wife. We were married 6 weeks ago. Rather sudden, but sometimes one simply knows. Adrian's tone was conversational, but his hand on Catherine's back was steady and warm. I believe you and Catherine are acquainted. Edmund seemed to struggle for words. No, I don't believe I've had the pleasure. How strange, Catherine said calmly. I could have sworn we'd met. Perhaps I'm mistaken. Lady Blackwood had reached them, her expression sharp with assessment. Duchess, what a surprise. I don't believe I've heard of your family. Where are you from? Here and there, Catherine replied smoothly, using the deflection Adrian had taught her. My late parents were not prominent in society. I'm fortunate that His Grace saw past my modest origins. Indeed. Lady Blackwood's gaze moved to her son, who still looked like he might be sick. Edmund, you've gone quite pale. Perhaps you should sit down. I'm fine, Mother. But his voice was strained. Just startled by the dropped glass. My apologies for the disruption. No harm done, Adrian said. Though I am curious, you looked as though you'd seen a ghost when you noticed my wife. Are you certain you've never met? The challenge hung in the air. Edmund's eyes darted between Catherine and Adrian, clearly trying to calculate how much to reveal, how much to deny. You simply reminded me of someone, Edmund said finally. Someone I knew briefly. It was disconcerting. How curious. Perhaps we can discuss it further over refreshments? Adrian gestured toward the supper room. I find I'm developing quite an interest in your estate management practices, Lord Blackwood. Your tenants seem remarkably fluid in their arrangements. Edmund's expression hardened. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? I've been reviewing northern property records. Interesting patterns emerge when one looks closely enough. But perhaps this isn't the time or place for such discussions. Adrian smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. We should allow you to recover from your shock. Come, Catherine. Lady Pemberton wanted to introduce you to the Archbishop. As they walked away, Catherine felt Edmund's stare burning into her back. When they were safely across the room, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. You handled that perfectly, Adrian murmured. Composed, gracious, giving him just enough rope to hang himself with inconsistent stories. He looked like he wanted to murder me all over again. He looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world begin to crack. Adrian guided her toward a quieter alcove. And tomorrow, those cracks will widen. What do you mean? I've arranged for several of Blackwood's former tenants to meet with Lord Whitmore and the Archbishop. They'll tell their stories, evictions, contract manipulation, deliberate crop sabotage. With you established as a credible Duchess rather than a spurned fiancé, your testimony corroborating theirs becomes much harder to dismiss. Catherine's heart began to beat faster. You're moving against him. We're moving against him. Together. Adrian's expression was serious. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Justice for the families he harmed. Yes. I didn't expect it to happen so quickly. The foundation has been building for weeks. Tonight was simply the public opening shot. He glanced across the room to where Edmund stood with his mother, both of them clearly having an intense, whispered conversation. He knows something has changed. He knows you're alive and protected, and dangerous to him. Now he has to decide how to respond. What will he do? Likely try to discredit you, claim you're an imposter or mentally unstable. But his desperation will make him sloppy, and sloppy is exactly what we need. They stayed at the assembly for another hour, Catherine continuing to play her role with increasing confidence. By the time they departed, she had spoken with dozens of influential people, had been accepted and welcomed as the Duchess of Northmere, and had established herself as someone whose word carried weight. On the carriage ride home, Adrian said quietly, "You were magnificent tonight. I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it." He reached across the carriage, taking her hand. "Catherine, I want you to know, whatever happens with Blackwood, whatever comes of this campaign against him, you are not merely a tool in my political strategy. You matter. You, the person, not just what you can help me accomplish." The words hit Catherine with unexpected force. She had been bracing herself against caring too much, against letting this strategic marriage become something that could hurt her. But Adrian was looking at her with genuine warmth, and she realized with startling clarity that she had already failed at maintaining emotional distance. Somewhere between the marriage of convenience and tonight's triumph, she had started falling for the Duke of Northmere. "You matter to me too," she said quietly. "More than I planned." Adrian smiled, and in the dim carriage light, he looked younger, less burdened by duty and politics and the weight of being a duke. Good, he said simply. Because I find I'm rather invested in keeping you safe, happy, and preferably by my side for a very long time. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was honest and real, and somehow more meaningful than any practiced romance could have been. Catherine squeezed his hand and let herself hope that strategy might become something more. The scandal broke 3 days after the winter assembly. It started with a letter to the Yorkshire Post, signed by 5 former Blackwood tenants, detailing their experiences with contract manipulation and illegal evictions. The letter was articulate, specific, and impossible to dismiss as the ravings of disgruntled labourers. By evening, Lord Whitmore had announced he was calling for a parliamentary inquiry into estate management practices, with Blackwood properties as the primary case study. By the following morning, 3 more families had come forward with similar stories. Adrian showed Catherine the morning papers over breakfast, his expression satisfied. It's working. The testimony is building momentum. Edmund will fight back. He already is. Adrian pointed to a smaller article. He's claiming the accusations are a coordinated attack by his political enemies, specifically naming me. He's suggesting you were planted as my wife specifically to damage his reputation. Can he prove that? No, because it isn't true. Yes, I married you partly to gain credible testimony against him, but that doesn't make the testimony false. The evidence stands regardless of our motivations. He set down the paper. Though he will try to make this about us, rather than about his actions. That afternoon, Edmund himself arrived at Northmere. Lord Blackwood is demanding an audience, Harrison announced, his disapproval clear. Shall I send him away? No, Adrian said, standing from his desk. Show him to the drawing room, and Harrison, have 2 footmen remain in the corridor. I don't trust Blackwood not to attempt something desperate. Catherine rose to join him. I'm coming with you. Catherine? He tried to kill me. I deserve to face him. Adrian studied her for a moment, then nodded. Stay close. If he tries anything, the footmen will intervene immediately. Edmund was pacing the drawing room when they entered, his controlled charm replaced by barely suppressed fury. Your Grace, he said with a mocking bow. And Catherine, or should I say, the Duchess of Northmere? How industrious of you to survive being abandoned in a snowstorm. How disappointing for you that I did, Catherine replied calmly. This is your doing, Northmere. Edmund ignored her, focusing on Adrian. You orchestrated this entire thing. Rescued her, married her, convinced her to lie about me. She didn't lie, Adrian interrupted coldly. Everything in those tenant testimonies is documented fact. Your ledgers exist. The eviction records are real. The contract manipulations happened exactly as described. You have no proof of that. Actually, we do. One of your former clerks was quite forthcoming about the record-keeping practices you employed. Adrian's smile was sharp. It seems loyalty only extends as far as the next paycheck, and you stopped paying him 3 months ago. Edmund's face went white. Matthews, that traitorous, that honest man who was tired of being complicit in fraud, yes. Adrian crossed his arms. The parliamentary inquiry will have access to his testimony, to the tenant statements, and to documentation of your property transactions that show patterns of deliberate exploitation. This is a coordinated attack. This is justice, Catherine said quietly. For the families you destroyed. For the children who watched their homes burn because you wanted their land. For every person who trusted you and was betrayed. Edmund turned on her, his fury now fully directed at the woman he'd tried to murder. You think you've won? You think marrying a duke makes you untouchable? I'll destroy your reputation. I'll tell everyone you're unstable, that you stole from my family, that you manufactured this entire scandal for revenge. And who will believe you? Adrian stepped between Edmund and Catherine, his posture protective. You, a man facing multiple accusations of fraud and abuse? Or her, the Duchess of Northmere, whose testimony is corroborated by dozens of witnesses and documented evidence? People will believe what I tell them. People will believe what makes sense. And what makes sense is that you're a man who got caught. Adrian's voice was cold and final. The inquiry will proceed. Your reputation is already damaged beyond repair. Every family you've harmed is finding courage to speak, because Catherine showed them it was possible to survive your cruelty and fight back. Edmund looked between them, seeing the united front they presented, the fortress of protection and credibility they'd built. "This isn't over," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Catherine said. "You lost the moment you left me alive. You should have been more thorough." After Edmund stormed out, Catherine found herself shaking with reaction. Adrian's hand was immediately on her shoulder, steady and warm. "You were remarkable," he said. "Facing him like that took courage I'm not sure I could have mustered. I'm not feeling particularly courageous right now. The bravest people never do. They just act anyway." He guided her to a chair. "It's done, Catherine. The inquiry will proceed. The evidence is overwhelming. Blackwood's political influence is collapsing as his allies distance themselves. You've won." "We've won," Catherine corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone." "Neither could I." Adrian knelt beside her chair, his expression serious. "When I married you, I told myself it was pure strategy. A practical arrangement that served both our needs. But Catherine, I need you to know. It stopped being pure strategy somewhere around the second week, maybe sooner." Catherine's breath caught. "Adrian, I love you," he said simply. "I didn't plan to. I certainly didn't expect to. But watching you transform from a woman I saved into a duchess who fights for justice, who faces her would-be murderer with courage, who cares so deeply about people she's never met, how could I not love that?" Tears pricked Catherine's eyes. "You're supposed to be logical and strategic." "I am. Loving you is the most logical thing I've ever done. You make me better. You make this life of duty and politics feel like it matters for reasons beyond obligation." He took her hands. "I know this started as a practical arrangement, but I'd like it to become something real, if you'll have me. Adrian, I already have you. I think I've been falling for you since you knelt beside me in Mrs. Fletcher's sitting room and promised I was safe." Catherine touched his face, feeling the roughness of his jaw beneath her fingers. "I love you, not the Duke of Northmere. You, the man who saved me, who believed me, who helped me become someone strong enough to fight back." He kissed her then, not the perfunctory brush of lips from their wedding, but something real and deep and full of promise. Catherine wrapped her arms around him and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. Love and gratitude, and the fierce joy of being chosen by someone who saw her truly. When they finally pulled apart, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "I'm keeping you," he said. "Not as a strategy, just as mine." "I'm keeping you too," Catherine replied. "Though you're stuck with a wife who's probably going to cause you endless political headaches by championing tenant rights." "Good. I could use someone to keep me honest and remind me that power exists to serve people, not exploit them." He stood, pulling her to her feet. "Now come. We have work to do. Those families need support, and I believe my Duchess has opinions about how Northmere's tenant contracts should be restructured. You're going to let me reform your estate management. I'm going to insist you reform my estate management. You're far better at understanding what actually serves people versus what merely looks good on paper." He offered his arm. "Shall we, Your Grace?" Catherine took his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her, and marveled at how her life had transformed. 6 weeks ago, she had been dying in the snow, abandoned and powerless. Now she was a duchess with a partner who valued her mind as much as her testimony, with purpose beyond mere survival. Edmund had left her in the cold, intending her death. Instead, he had inadvertently given her the chance to become someone capable of destroying him and saving the families he'd harmed. Justice, it turned out, was the best revenge. Spring came to Northmere with a riot of wildflowers and the particular sweetness that followed hard winters. Catherine stood in the refurbished East Wing, now housing the Northern Tenant Alliance, an organization she'd founded to provide legal aid and advocacy for exploited farmers, and reviewed the week's correspondence. 15 families had written requesting help. 7 former Blackwood tenants had successfully reclaimed seized properties through the courts. 3 other landowners had approached her about reforming their own estate management practices. The parliamentary inquiry had concluded with damning findings. Edmund Blackwood had been stripped of his seat in Parliament, fined heavily, and forced to return stolen properties and make restitution to wronged families. His parents had retreated to their London house in disgrace. The Blackwood name, once respected, was now synonymous with exploitation and abuse. "Your Grace," Mrs. Fletcher entered with tea. "His Grace requests your presence in the gardens when you're finished here. He says it's important." Catherine smiled. 6 months of marriage, and Adrian still got nervous about asking her to take breaks from work. "Tell him I'll be there shortly." She found him in the rose garden, standing beneath an arbor heavy with early blooms. He was holding a letter, his expression both amused and exasperated. "What is it?" Catherine asked. "An invitation. Lord Pemberton is hosting a summer gathering and specifically requested the Duchess of Northmere attend to discuss modern approaches to estate stewardship." He handed her the letter. "You've become quite the influential reformer. Is that a problem?" "It's magnificent, though I'm beginning to think I married someone far more politically powerful than myself." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I'm not complaining, understand? Just acknowledging that you've rather upstaged me. You rescued me from death and helped me achieve justice. I think you're entitled to some credit. I did the easy part. You did the brave part. Surviving, fighting back, refusing to let cruelty define your future." He kissed her temple. "I'm proud of you, Catherine. Every day, I'm proud of you." They stood together in the spring sunshine, surrounded by roses that had survived the winter and bloomed all the brighter for it. Catherine thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, frightened, powerless, left to die in the snow. That woman had survived, had transformed, had become someone who could face her would-be murderer and win. But more importantly, that woman had found partnership with a man who saw strength instead of weakness, potential instead of damage, a duchess instead of a victim. "Adrian," Catherine said, "thank you for finding me." "Thank you for being worth finding," he replied, "and for choosing to stay after you realized what a stubborn, politically obsessed husband you'd acquired. I like stubbornness, and I'm rather politically obsessed with myself these days. Perfect match, then." "Perfect," Catherine agreed and meant it. She had been left in the cold to die, but she'd been found by the right person, at the right moment, and together they'd built something neither had planned but both had needed. Justice, partnership, love that grew from strategy into something real and lasting. Edmund Blackwood had tried to destroy her. Instead, he'd inadvertently shown her exactly how strong she could become. And that, Catherine thought, as Adrian kissed her beneath the roses, was the best possible revenge.